Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. This past weekend, the Summer Showdown happened in the APAC region and in the NA region. Two tournaments, two champions. Let's talk about the tournaments. I want to talk about them pretty broadly. I'm not going to go into specific matches as much. Just going to kind of talk about the tournaments, the teams, how they performed, all that type of stuff. Let's start off with the APAC region. The Shanghai Dragons going into this tournament were the favorites, and they showed why, dropping 2 maps the entire tournament to the Seoul Dynasty in the finals, but they also won every map but one in the qualifiers. So 3 maps total dropped in the tournament qualifiers and the tournament itself. Impressive run from the Shanghai Dragons. My bracket, outside of the scores for the matches, though they were generally speaking pretty good, perfect bracket from me. The only matches that I got scores wrong were the first Fusion Dynasty match, the winners finals, and the game between the Fusion and the Charge. The Shanghai Charge game, the second Fusion Dynasty game, and the finals, I got all of those scores right. So not a super surprising tournament here. We expected the Shanghai Dragons to win. They looked incredible this tournament cycle. Obviously, like I said, in the qualifiers, only dropping 1 map to the Philadelphia Fusion. Who Are You's Genji was incredible this tournament. Definitely the biggest difference maker, I think, for the Dragons, though Lip also looking very, very good. Void on Junker Queen, very solid, and great looking meta from Izayaki and Lee Jae-gon, who, if my math is correct, Izayaki is the winningest player in Overwatch League history with 7 tournaments under his belt, which is a lot. Some players in the Shock with quite a few as well. Violet's been there for all of the Shock titles, so he's got a lot as well. But I believe the most goes the way of Izayaki with 7. So really great performance from the Shanghai Dragons. I wish we could have seen the Shanghai Dragons match up with the Dallas Fuel, who of course won in the West, but really good look from the Dragons. I thought the Dynasty were pretty good. I actually was very impressed by them in the finals. A 4-2 result in favor of the Dragons, yes, but the Dynasty, that was the closest finals match we've had yet this season. I believe the Mid-Season Madness was a 4-1 in favor of the Gladiators over the Shock, so this was the closest finals yet. I think Seoul is still a really good team. I think there is a pretty big gap between the Dynasty and the Dragons and the rest of the league. But right now, you have to look at the Dragons as the best team in the APAC region. I thought they looked really good going into the Mid-Season Madness. I think they look really good now. They're getting back into form. Don't write them off as a potential championship team in the entire season. They look very, very good. Dynasty, I think, just did not have the same flashiness this meta. I think the team probably would have looked better if they could have had Prophet on the Genji and Iris on the Brig. Prophet's Brig was okay, but it just wasn't a healing Brig in the same way that I think you would have liked out of Iris. It was kind of, I think, the weakness for the team. Damage dealing, absolutely very, very good from Prophet, but his healing stats just not there. So I don't think this was the best meta for them. I don't think they looked bad, obviously. They were better than the other teams in the APAC region, but I think they just didn't have the same flashiness and pizzazz that a team like Shanghai had, where they just looked great on everything. This was a very good tournament from them. Really, really impressive showing from them. The Fusion, I thought, looked pretty good. I thought MN3 had a really, really, really good tournament. I thought against the Dynasty, he looked really good. Against the Charge, he looked really good. So Fusion, I think, are still a good team. I think that they put themselves in a better position right now than the Spark. They are tied in terms of league points now based on the results of this tournament, with the Spark missing. So the Fusion definitely, I think, have a chance to solidify themselves in the top 3 for the APAC region, bypassing potentially the play-in tournament, which for them would be great because they've struggled against Chengdu this season, and they've struggled a bit against the Spark and a bit against the Valiant. So I think that they are a team who really need to get some wins as they go forward and be able to jump into that top 3 spot, because that's really the thing that I think will save them this season, because that's where they have had their biggest struggles so far this season. When you think about them against Chengdu, they've beaten the Dynasty, they've beaten the Dragons, but they have not beaten Chengdu. So that's kind of what you hope from them going forward if you're a Fusion fan. That's the thing I think they need to kind of focus on doing and pushing forward in that way. But I thought they did a pretty good tournament, and you have to shout out the Guangzhou Charge. Nobody would have expected them to make this tournament. They didn't win a map in the tournament. It was a pretty disappointing and lackluster performance from them in the tournament itself. But this is a team that had a single win going into this tournament. They won their first game of the season, and then they lost the next 11 games. And now, a really good look from them. I guess they won one game somewhere else, I think, maybe. No, they were 4-2. That's right. They were 4-2. So, yes, they lost every game but one in the first half of the season. And then we're 4-2 in this tournament cycle. Some good wins. They jump over the Valiant in the standings now. 2-point lead over them. They have a shot in the play-ins. And if the play-ins is the Spark, the Hunters, and the Charge, do not count the Charge out from potentially being a playoff team, because I think right now they look better than the Spark and the Hunters. Now, this meta was different. This meta was definitely not the main meta you would expect as the season progresses. We don't expect to see the Junker Queen meta in the final tournament cycle or the Countdown Cup play-ins stuff. So it is a really, really, really big potential week or tournament cycle for the Charge as we go forward, but you have to give them a lot of credit. They did what they needed to do. They qualified for this tournament. They got themselves, 5 more points in this tournament cycle. Really, really, really big from them. They could even potentially jump the Hunters for a spot in the play-ins even, possibly. So really good tournament from them, even though their results in the tournament itself weren't that great. They had to play a lot of tough opponents, but if they have to match up against the Hunters and the Spark in the play-ins, don't write off the Charge. I think they looked really, really good, and I think that this tournament doesn't necessarily reflect the growth that they've had in this tournament. Let's move on to the West, though, because the West was far more surprising, full of a lot more upsets than the Eastern region, which didn't have any. Obviously, like I said before, Dallas Fuel walk away with the victory. 4-0 Grand Finals win over the San Francisco Shock. Fuel were the best team in the West in this tournament. It was obvious. Obviously, they were undefeated in the qualifiers. They beat the Shock last week, and they beat the Shock twice in this tournament. Didn't lose a map to them this tournament. They looked the best against the Shock. They lost a map to London. They had to reverse sweep the Justice. There were definitely doubts about the Fuel, I think, after that first day, but they righted the ship and went all the way, winning it. It was a very good look from them this tournament. Hanbin, to me, really put himself in the MVP conversation firmly as a favorite. There could definitely be some recency bias there, but I thought Hanbin was an MVP candidate after the kickoff clash. I think he's even more of an MVP candidate after this tournament. I thought he had some incredible plays. He really took the team, put them on his back, and had some huge moments where he turned the tide for this tournament for the Fuel and won them points and maps. I mean, his big 1v5 or 2v5, whatever it was, rampage on Lijiang Tower that took a 99 to 60% Shock lead when they already were winning after winning the first point, and turned it into a point win, a round win, and then a map win, and then a match win. I think Hanbin had a fantastic weekend. I think Hanbin absolutely in the Summer Showdown was one of the best players on the field. He was one of the best players throughout the entire qualifiers, throughout the tournament itself. I think he's firmly in the MVP conversation. Obviously, Proper, still a big part of that MVP conversation, but to me, right now, I would say Hanbin over Proper if I had to pick an MVP, at least in the Western region. The APAC region is a lot harder for me to pull one from, because I just think the APAC region has just been so competitive. There hasn't really been a clear favorite over there. So I think it's interesting to kind of look at where we are in the league as a whole. But I think Hanbin right now might be in the driver's seat for the MVP. I just think he had such a great performance, and I think he has been there for the team. Proper may be the most consistent player in the league, and he may be a huge part of why the Shock are successful. But to me, the lack of titles and the honestly pretty lackluster performance in tournaments for the Shock keeps Proper, in my eyes, from really having that locked up MVP spot. But the Shock did have a pretty good tournament. They were obviously a solid team. They made it to the winners finals. They made it to the grand finals. They only went down to the losers bracket at the very end of the losers bracket. They didn't have a bad tournament by any means, but I definitely don't feel like they are in the pole position for playoffs. I would not pick the Shock right now to win the championship. I would honestly, right now, I feel more confident in the Fuel. I feel more confident in the Gladiators. I feel more confident in the Dragons. I would probably put the Shock around where I would have the Dynasty, right? In that kind of 4-5 spot in terms of confidence in winning a title. I don't think the Shock have looked good enough in those big games, in those big moments, for me to look at them and say, yes, this is a team that's going to win the whole thing. They've been good, yes. They've been very, very good. But I just don't think right now they are a championship team. I just haven't seen it. I don't think that they look good enough outside of Proper to really be that team. They can beat, I think, a lot of the low-level competition, the mid-level competition, but when it comes to that high-level elite competition, I just don't think they have it. Let's talk about the two biggest surprises, though, of this tournament, the Toronto Defiant and the Florida Mayhem. The Defiant made it all the way to Championship Sunday, losing in the lower bracket finals to the Shock. Obviously, playing in front of the home crowd, they got bumped to the losers bracket immediately with a 3-1 loss to London Spitfire, and they clawed their way through the lower bracket with a 3-1 win over Washington, a 3-0 win over Houston, a 3-2 win over Florida, and then finally a 3-1 loss to the San Francisco Shock. Very great performance from them. In front of the home crowd was awesome to see. The Toronto Defiant are one of those teams that I really like to see them succeed. I like a lot of those players. I think the organization, generally speaking, has done a lot of really great things. They've done really, really well. They've just not really had a lot of that kind of success that you've had. I still think that they're a couple pieces away from being an elite team. Although Genji stepped up a lot this tournament, I think he was a huge part of their success. I think Twilight and Chorong, very, very solid. Really great performances out of them in this entire qualifiers and tournament itself. So, been very, very impressed by the Defiant, and I'm really happy to see them have a great tournament run. After struggling quite a bit throughout the season, they really were just kind of a middle-of-the-pack, middling team. This was a meta that was really, really good for them. I think they've done a very good job. I think they're definitely a team that's going to be locked in top 6 as we move on throughout the rest of the season. I think that right now, they are in that 6th position, but I think that they look better right now than your Outlaws, your Reign. They're pretty close with the Spitfire. So I think that they right now are in a really solid position. I think they're going to be a really great team as we move into kind of the end of the season. I've been very impressed with them, and honestly, great stuff out of them. The other team that impressed me was the Florida Mayhem. I thought they were the weakest-looking team in the Western region going into this one, and they did not look great in the first day against Houston Outlaws. Sermon Jed was playing from Florida. He wasn't in Toronto until the second day, but the second and third day of the tournament, Florida looked much better. 3-0 win over the Vancouver Titans, reverse sweep against the London Spitfire, again in a tournament setting, and then a close series against the Toronto Defiant. Very, very, very good looks from the Florida Mayhem. I think that they were, in my opinion, the team that impressed me the most this tournament. I had no expectations for this Mayhem roster. I genuinely thought they were the worst team in the region that made the tournament. I thought they got really lucky because they beat the Eternal and the Excelsior to get into the tournament. They were a pretty weak 3-3 team, but they proved me wrong. They were a very solid team. They looked really good against Vancouver and really good against London in that second half, and they looked really good against the Toronto Defiant. I think the Florida Mayhem know what they are. I don't love the double flexport composition that they were running, but it was ultimately successful, and it was a thing that I think led them to victory in a lot of their matches because they know it's what they're good at. They didn't feel that the team's strengths were with the Lucio Brig, So they ran what they were good at, and it worked, generally speaking. So very, very good for the Florida Mayhem, I think, to really show that they are not the weak team that I thought they were. They made me look like a fool. They played a lot better than expected, so good for the Mayhem. Houston Outlaws, London Spitfire, I think are two teams that did not play as well as you would have expected. Round 1 victories, good for them. London over Toronto, Houston over Florida. But then pretty quick round 1 exits to the Fuel and the Shock. And then they lost. The Houston Outlaws, I think, were probably the most disappointing of the two because they were swept by the Defiant, who, the Defiant are good. The last 2 times they played in tournaments, the Outlaws beat them pretty handily. You might remember the Pelican moment during the kickoff clash where he just popped off on Coliseo and just completely erased the Defiant. And the Defiant get their 3-0 revenge in front of the home crowd. Huge, huge, huge match for the Defiant. The Outlaws didn't look as good. I expected more out of the Outlaws, but I don't think they lost to a bad team, so I'm not extremely disappointed. To me, London losing to Florida is arguably worse because the Spitfire just cannot find success against this Mayhem roster. They have lost 3 straight to the Mayhem. That's a bit of an issue. They also have 2 of those 3 were reverse sweeps by the Mayhem, so that's concerning for the London Spitfire. I thought the London Spitfire looked fine. I think they'll look better when the meta changes. I'd like to see them work Khan into the roster. I think he just has that kind of mechanic pop that could be very, very good for them. I'm not surprised they played Landon in this tournament. They've had a lot more time to work him into the roster. He's been with the team a lot longer. If we see a double flex sport meta again, or if we see just a big Zen meta, I could definitely see Khan being the guy they go to, and he could definitely be a player that provides a lot for them. I didn't think they were particularly bad, like I said. I just think that they did not perform the best against a team they've struggled with this season. Not going to be too critical of that. It's hard to beat teams that match up well against you. I think Florida just has a good matchup, and I think that's what happened. But I don't want to write off London entirely. I think they're pretty solid. They did better than I expected them to, honestly. I thought they were going to be 0-2, but they did beat the Defiant, so credit where credit's due. But they did not have the best performance beyond that. Vancouver and Washington were the 2 teams that finished last from the Western region. Vancouver, much like the Guangzhou Charge, I'm not going to be too critical of the Vancouver Titans. They were a 1-win team going into... Actually, they were a 0-win team going into the midseason going into the Summer Showdown. They qualified for the tournament 3-3. Wins over the Eternal and the Excelsior and the Justice. So they got the wins they kind of needed to. They're a team that are going to claw their way up. I think it's a tough battle for them to try to get that play-in spot. Boston, I think, has a 2-point lead on them. Maybe it's a 1-point lead, but the record for it's a 2-point lead. So the Titans really need a 3-game swing. They would need to have 3 more wins than the Uprising. And I just think that's really difficult. I don't think it's going to really happen. I think this just kind of was... the Titans needed to get another win, I think, in the qualifiers to have a shot at the play-ins. I think it's just... a 3-point climb is way too massive, I think. I think it's going to be very difficult for the Titans to overcome that 3-point deficit that they realistically kind of need. Because even if they win 2 more than the Uprising and they have the same amount of points, the Uprising's record will be better. So it's tough. I think the Titans are really going to struggle to kind of get where they need to be. And so I think that it was a good showing from them. It was definitely something like respectable. But I think it's going to be tough for them to really kind of have that play-in appearance after what we saw. Making it, I think, was a huge accomplishment. I think it really shows that they have a lot of the pieces that they need. I think Aspire's fantastic. I really do think Aspire is one of the best players in the league right now. I think he's incredible. I think he has consistently been a top performer. And so to me, there is a core for this Vancouver Titans roster that they can build around in the future. I think Moss has played very well this season. King, I think, has been a really good addition. I think you solidify that tank role bolster the DPS position with another player who can kind of help you in that kind of double hit scan meta. And I think a flex support. I don't think Aztec and Skyrim have been bad, but I think if you can find some talent there to just bolster it up a little bit more, I think you would have a really, really, really solid Vancouver Titans roster behind Aspire, King, and maybe another piece in that DPS role. Yeah, that's it for the Titans, though. Washington Justice, almost beating the Fuel. Back-to-back tournament appearances where they are picked by the number 1 seed, go up 2-0, and then get reverse swept. That's a tough look for a team that's been pretty good. But I think that the Justice are in a decent position for the play-ins. I definitely think they're secure. I don't think anybody's going to jump them in the play-ins right there. They have 10 points. The Titans literally can't end up with more points. If they went 6-0, they would have 10 points. But even if... Right, so the Justice would have to lose every game. And then the Titans, even with 6 points... Well, they would actually jump them if they won all 6 games and the Justice lost all 6 games, but I don't see that happening. So I think Justice, pretty safe, if I'm being honest with you. I think they'll be fine. They'll make it in. I think it's going to be good for them. I think that this was a decent showing from them. Obviously, a team that we didn't expect a lot of, considering what circumstances that the roster had surrounding them going into this tournament. Losing a bunch of the players that they have on the roster by trading them away. Tough to have any real kind of shot at a big kind of splash in a tournament when you don't have the flexibility in the pieces. But I thought they played fine for a team that, once again, relatively low expectations based on what we've seen from them and based on what happened with the roster. So, all in all, a pretty good tournament. I think the Western region, the surprises, the upsets, the Toronto Defiant run was my favorite part of this tournament. And I think that, while it was it did go the way we expected to, especially the APAC tournament was not really much surprise in that one. It was definitely nice to see some teams that have looked good so far this tournament get rewarded. And they've been solid teams all season. So, I think that's always a nice thing to see. So that's it for the Summer Showdown for 2022. We have one more stage, and then we have the play-in tournament and the playoffs. And soon, Overwatch 2. So we're getting almost to the end of the season and the launch of Overwatch 2. So a lot of interesting stuff going on. So this week, power rankings. And then next week, we'll, of course, have picks and predictions. But I think I also am going to do a little Overwatch 2 video next week, so stay tuned for that. That's gonna be all though for me for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. Comment down below your thoughts on the 2022 Summer Showdown, NA, APAC, either or both, whatever. Let me know down below. That's all from me. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy, and until next time, bye bye.